What is up, Impact Heroes? Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Rick Ornelas. Thank you for spending some time with us today because we know time's a valuable resource and we're going to make it worth your while. I appreciate each and every one of you, not just for listening, but for who you are. I know you're sparking change to make the world a better place every day, and I am humbled and grateful for your efforts. It takes all of us doing our part to spread positive change, and that's what this show is all about. Motivating you with stories of struggle, courage, and hope to empower you to make a difference in your life and the lives of others.
Are you interested in having Rick speak at your event or business? Here is what others have to say.
Did not know his story, and it was so inspirational, and his presence on stage, his authenticity was just incredible.
I absolutely loved his performance. It made me feel some type of way.
If you're looking for a speaker for your next event, hire Rick. I promise you this, you will not be disappointed.
Visit rickornels.com to book him today.
Welcome back, Impact Heroes. All right, if you haven't listened to part one of the Jim Woodford episode of his journey to heaven, you have to go back to last week's episode and hear the first part on how he got to that journey. And once you get there, you're going to see that he was in his truck and he had taken a bunch of pills, and that's where we left off. So he's about to dive into some incredible things talking about that journey to heaven. So I hope you enjoy it.
I discovered I had stashed some medication in the glove box, and I thought, well, I'll just take another one to get me around this. And I did, and I sat back in the truck waiting for that warm feeling of relief that would take the pain away. But it was not to be, because instead of that warm relief that I felt, all of a sudden my feet felt as though they were on fire. And I remember looking down under the dash of the truck to see where the heat source was coming from, because the truck wasn't running. And very rapidly it made its way up my legs and inboard from my fingertips. So upward toward my chest and inboard through my shoulders and into my chest. And then I felt as though I was drowning. And I remember I kept raising my head as though I was trying to keep it up to breathe. And I tell people, when you've done something, when you're dying. I knew I had done something catastrophic, and my body had finally pushed back. And that I was dying, it was that intense a feeling and no breath. And for someone that had never prayed, for someone that had never recognized God for all the gifts that I had been given, from somewhere deep inside of me, Rick, a place that I hadn't been to since I was a child, there was this feeling of remorse and regret. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair. I'd faced death a number of times, never flinched. But I had this overwhelming feeling that I had been given this great life, and never once had I ever thanked God for it. And so, as the sun was setting on the day and setting on my life, I raised my right hand to the setting sun. And I remember I was in the death throes, they call it, and I was shaking violently. And my hand, as I raised it, and I said the first of what I believe to be 6 words that made all the difference. So these are the first 3. And as I said, it wasn't fear. It wasn't fear of what laid ahead for me, if there was anything, because I had no belief in that. But I just felt I needed to cry out that I was sorry, that I had wasted my life. And so that's why, with my hand shaking, I cried out, God, forgive me. Forgive me. And I remember falling forward and hitting my head on the steering wheel, and I'm gone. I'm not sure how long I was out, but I remember sitting back up and getting my bearings, and it's a beautiful evening in April. The sun is shining. I know time has passed because the sun is now right on the horizon. And suddenly I become aware of something. The pain that had plagued my life for all those years was gone, completely gone. It was as though, Rick, I'd taken off a heavy, wet overcoat, and now I was released from it. And I'm elated. I finally got it right. You have to take it all. You have to take all the medication. And I slide out of my truck. I mean, it's, as I said, it's an evening in April. It's a gorgeous spring evening. I can smell the grass. I can see the setting sun. I can hear the birds singing. And I walk about 15 feet away from the truck, and I'm overwhelmed. I feel like I'm 18 again, you know? And after all these months and years of agonizing pain, and I happened to look down at my feet, and it was as though I could see through my feet and see the ground beneath. And immediately, Diamond Jim, you know, I'm rationalizing, well, that medication probably has some after effects, but I'm actually looking through my feet at the ground. And I, I, I'm so just enthralled by the moment of being pain free and enjoying the peace and the beauty. And then I turn and look back toward the truck. And instantly I'm outraged because some son of a gun is in my truck. Not only that, he's sleeping on the steering wheel. So I get ready to go over there and give him a good what for. Have you ever had a dream where you're trying to run, something's chasing you and you can't move your feet? That's what I
Oh,
felt.
yeah, absolutely.
But I did manage to make some progress. And then I look up again and I look in the cab of the truck. And I can't, the words fail me to give you the kind of reaction I had, which was startling, to come to the realization that that is no stranger in the truck. It is me. How can this be? I'm here and that my body is in the truck. And I'm stunned. But right away, Diamond Jim takes over, the guy that could fix anything. So I start to concoct a plan. Well, if I can get in the truck and get back into my body, everything will be okay. So I start to move toward it, and suddenly I begin to rise. Now, as a pilot, I'm a good judge of altitude. And suddenly I'm 10, 12, 15 feet above the truck, and I'm gently floating backwards. And I can look through the rear window of the truck and see my head sloped over the wheel. There's blood gushing out of my mouth. And, but I'm rising. And I get to about 1,200 feet. And for some reason, I looked above me for the first time because I could see the surrounding countryside, see my truck, see the setting sun. And I look up, and this golden ring appeared in the sky about 60 feet in diameter, like a golden wedding ring. Then the center filled with gold, and then the gold swung back inwards. And Rick, at that moment, my body canted to about 45 degrees, and it was as though I was still flying the L-1011, the TriStar, and I had advanced all the throttles on takeoff, and you're pushed back in your seat. And I slipped at a tremendous rate of speed into this tunnel of light. Now, I think almost everyone has heard about the tunnel of light. I never paid any attention to it, but I certainly heard the term before. And as the most incredible thing is having, raced cars and flown fast aircraft. What struck me immediately was the volume of speed that I had gained in a short period of time, because the inside of this tunnel was unique. It was filled with golden cloud, but I could see beyond the clouds and see the stars streaming by me. I was describing this in Baltimore, in a church in Baltimore one night, and there was a young guy in the front pew, and he said, "Sounds like the opening of Star Trek to me." And that was a great analogy. That's exactly what it was like, when they go to warp speed and the stars are streaming by me. But curiously, no sound of wind, no sound of jet engines. Finally, I'm saving on fuel. and but incredible speed, and I am terrified because I'm a rational guy. I have to read the manual to understand it, and I had never read the Bible, which is our manual, and or God's manual, I should say. And I got. There are times when I think it happened instantaneously. There are times when it feels like it was a long time. But at the end of this golden tunnel was an even brighter light. And I get to the end of the tunnel, and suddenly I decelerate very quickly. I come upright, and I'm facing, I still don't know whether to call it a door or a portal, but it's covered in mist. And I'm standing in front of it. And as you would, I was cautious about stepping forward. I can't see what I'm stepping into. And and but there's a light in there, and it's beautiful. And and I glance behind me, and I realize I have to step forward. The tunnel is closing behind me, and so I stepped in very gingerly, put my right foot down, felt something solid, and then stepped in and down about 6 inches, and I have both feet on the ground, what I think is the ground, but I look down. The mist starts to clear, Rick, and all of a sudden the mist vanished, and I'm looking down and I can't believe it. I mean, I've golfed on some nice courses, but this is the most incredible green grass I've ever seen. Every blade lit from within. Now, I don't want to make that sound Las Vegas-y. It wasn't, but it had a life and a light to it. I now know what they mean by the saying, the grass is always greener on the other side. They're talking about heaven. And I'm stunned. Where am I? I'm standing on grass, you know? And I look up, the mist clears, and I get my first gaze at paradise. Even now, since 2014 to now, I still struggle to find the words to describe the indescribable. But if you could take the most beautiful scenarios on earth, vistas, spectacles, and multiply it by 10,000 times 10,000, you might get a little closer to what I was looking at. And
Yeah, incredible.
Vista, and I mean, I'd never read the Bible, so I didn't know that it says there are no sun, nor moon, nor stars. But the first thing as a pilot that I looked up in this beautiful deep blue sky. I'm looking for the sun, and I can't find it. And yet I realized suddenly that the light source is from everything around me, the rocks, the ground, the trees, the flowers, the petals, the grass. That's the source of light. And yet the sky is bright, but a cerulean blue. And I never knew what that meant till an artist told me what you're describing is cerulean blue. And I'm just stunned at the spectacle that I'm looking at, because and this was to my right, okay, and I'm just entranced, so I'm just concentrating on that. And flowers, Rick, that we have here, but also millions of flowers that I've never seen before. And I've been in every tropical country on the planet, I think. I've never seen anything like this. And I've walked through the gardens in France, in Limoges, where they get the essences for perfume from the flowers. I'd never seen anything like this. And as I'm looking, I'm stunned by the beauty of it. And the hills dropped off, and there were clouds at the level of the hill, which doesn't make sense. Clouds are up further. But I moved my vision from that and to the left, and as I came across that beautiful green grass, went from brightly lit green to brown to scorched to black, and then dropped off in a crevasse. And I've always been, and the sky was dark on that side, but I've always been an inquisitive person. I need to know. And so I very gingerly made my way over to this drop off. And I realized that what I'm looking at is a deep chasm canyon, um, and the walls of it are shiny and black, not unlike anthracite coal. And as I'm looking down, and here's where it gets strange. I'd gone from this gorgeous vista, and now I'm looking down, but I was intrigued by the difference. And so as I'm looking down, I thought I saw something deep in that pit, uh, like like you'd see a campfire in a distant valley at night, and it was quite red and flickering. And then, to my amazement, um, I heard something strange. I heard as though it was the sound of two heavy iron doors being pushed open on hinges that had not been used or oiled in a long time. And as those doors open, so I'm looking down and sideways, and the doors are here, and they're massive, and they're creaking open and screeching as they're opened. They're being pushed open from inside. And then, to my absolute horror, as the light from the fire grew greater, and the light from whatever this creature was came out, something huge and horrible and ugly lumbered, kind of shambled out of this. And I'm transfixed because this is something I had never expected. And as I'm looking down, I realized this thing is about 60 feet tall. So the pit was probably, 120 feet. So it occupied quite a bit of it. And it was a round body, bulbous body, uh, with a really squat head on its shoulders. But it had, and I'm looking at it from behind, so it had come out and was as though it was sniffing or looking for something. And and it had pointed ears. And I try not to make this sound like a bad horror film, but this is something that Hollywood couldn't duplicate. And I realized it was looking for something in the bottom of the pit. And I kind of eased backward. And when I did, I saw it make a quick move. And then it turned its head up toward me. And I saw its face for the first time. And the look of absolute hatred in its eyes, not just for me, but for all of mankind, was startling. Startling. And it was as though it was, and then it had the face of a hyena on this squat body. Its body was on fire. There was smoke and flames coming from the body, but it seemed to be part of it. And then it put one clawed arm up on the pit, and for something so huge and lumbering, it moved with incredible agility, and it came up that rock wall like a fly walking up a screen door. And I stumbled backwards because it reared up out of the pit, and I fell backwards on my elbows, and it stood over me. And there was the strangest thing. I heard screaming coming from within the body. It was not from the creature, from its mouth. The screaming was coming from within the body. And it sounded to me as though this thing had consumed souls, and they were screaming for relief. And I know it sounds like a bad horror movie, but listen, the old time preachers weren't wrong. We've become a society of, oh well, it's just a legend, it's just made up. Cynicism is rampant in the world, thanks to social media, which I'm awful glad we have. But cynicism is rampant. And that's just what Satan wants. That's just what he wants you to believe, that it can't be. But Rick, for your viewers, I want them to know, just as some of us have had this beautiful glimpse of heaven to prove that heaven is real, hell is real. There is a place of consequence for the life you live here, which is the central message of why I do what I do. I don't want anyone to ever experience what I went through and saw. And I know your viewers have a million questions, and I can answer a lot of them for them. But this thing is now hovering over me, and I will. And it was huge, and strange how your mind remembers certain things. The smell that came with it was the smell of death and decay, and 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 things that should never see the light of day. And I'm just scrambling backwards on my elbows to get away from this thing, and it's coming toward me. And then, as though I wasn't terrified enough, along with the screaming that came from its body, it spoke to me. And I remember the feeling of dread. This creature knew me. It knew me. And I mean, I wasn't that bad a guy. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't rob anyone. I gave to charity if there was a tax receipt. Hardly a good person. But surely I didn't deserve this. And then it focused on me in those glowing red eyes and face like a hyena. What my mind remembers, what my ears remember, is the sound of its saliva dripping on the ground in front of me. It's drooling in anticipation of having me. And then I hear this voice, Jim, Jim, we are here for you. This is your time with us. Come to us, Jim. Come with us. Rick, I believe that had I, and I turned to keep my sanity, and I felt it lumber close to me. I smelt it. I heard its saliva dripping behind me, and I kept hearing this voice. And I really believe that had I turned around, I would have been grabbed like that, just acknowledging its presence. And remember I said there's 6 words.
Yeah.
The first 3 I cried out in the truck, God forgive me. And then I turned my face toward the beautiful sky on the other side. And with this thing snarling behind me, and I actually felt something sharp right down my back. And
Oof.
I raised my hands and I cried out, God, God, help me. Help me. I, who did nothing to deserve any recognition or any help, was crying out for help. And instantly, 3 points of light appeared in that brilliant blue sky, all at different points on the compass, but rapidly coming to one point. And I concentrated on that to keep my sanity. All the while, this thing is trying to seduce me into turning around and acknowledging its presence. And those points of light all came to one, and it formed a larger light. And then I began to see forms within the light coming rapidly toward where I was standing. Old habits die hard. As a pilot, I thought they were coming in hot, and they were. But suddenly I began to realize, these are angels. I can see the wings. I can see the size of them. And they're coming as a trio. They're coming directly toward me. And as they touched down, made a beautiful landing. The light that preceded them washed over me, and I turned quickly to look back, and I turned in time to see that light from the evil, that light strike the evil creature. And when that light from the angels hit it, Rick, it screeched and screamed and stumbled backwards and down in that hole like a rat running for cover. And that's why I tell people, darkness and evil cannot exist in the light of God. If you let the light of God into your life, I guarantee you it will protect you. It will protect you all of your days. And it's feelings of, where am I? What am I? What are these? What just happened? I'm trying to process all this because I'd suddenly gone from this sense of impending doom to this, along with the light came this beautiful feeling of love and protection for me. And I turn back and I look, and there are three. We call them angels. They call themselves guardians. And the first one, they came in a single line. And the first one that came up to me, which I later found out had been my guardian all my life. Now, that poor angel had pulled an awful tour of duty, I'll tell you that. But here he was. And they're all tall. This is the first, I'm not very tall, but he was about 10 feet tall, coming behind. And I say him, and it only because I don't want to say it, but they had the grace and beauty of a female and the strength and of a warrior, because the third angel that came forward was 15 feet tall. Now you think about this: when someone 15 feet tall stands in front of you, everything else is in proportion. So the eyes were huge, and But if you can imagine for a moment, because people love to hear this, these beings of light, cloaked in light, but they have a form, they have hands, they have feet. Um, the fact that they had landed, the wings had retreated, but there were like two spires of golden light coming up from their shoulder blades and behind and canting inwards. And they have pure white or silver hair. And the interesting effect, and I've always been a stickler for detail, was the light from the wings, the tips of the wings, refracted and formed this shimmer of golden light over their silver hair. And I think that's where we get the idea of a halo. It's not a circle. It's a burst of light above their, and it's a refraction of light from their wings. And they're coming toward me. And the tallest one, the warrior, and I knew immediately he was a warrior because he or she was dressed, as an ancient warrior would be, with greaves on his arms and on his legs, and a belt with a sword, and just magnificent. And they're smiling at me, and I immediately felt such love in their presence. And the first angel, mine, comes up to me, and he's 10 feet tall, so he comes up to this shoulder. And I sense this arm coming around me, and he pulls me tight, and then a wing comes out around the arm and pulls me even tighter. And there I am, snuggled up to an angel. And people have said to me, what is it like to be hugged by an angel?
For sure.
And I struggled to describe it. It was like putting your finger in a light socket, but it felt good. Power that went through me. And I look up into this beautiful face, framed by this silver hair and this gentle smile. And the lips didn't move. I don't like to call it telepathy. Or maybe it was a form of telepathy, but I felt that I was in the angel's mind and he was in mine. And then I heard this beautiful voice, and it said to me, "Fear not, James, for we are your constant friends." And now if you get a handwritten note from me, I always signed it, "Jim, your constant friend." And I felt so loved and warm and safe from everything. And so the best description I can give of being hugged by an angel is like being hugged by 50 grandmothers at once. You know, that, that wonderful feeling that only a grandmother can get.
Yeah, of course.
Uh, with a hint of tapioca. I smelled tapioca. Now, I'm not here to form the Church of the Holy Tapioca. I'm not. But here's the kind of God that we serve, Rick. This is a God who knows us so intimately, despite the billions of us that have occupied this planet, knows each of us so well that he remembered. And I think he wants to put us at ease with all that our senses are being inundated with. So when I was a little boy beating my way home through a snowstorm in northern Canada in the middle of July, I'd get to my grandmother's house and she'd have a big bowl of warm tapioca on the stove for me. Isn't that beautiful? The God of the universe.
Yeah, beautiful.
Took the time to know that I liked tapioca. And when I speak in person now, and the story has gotten out over the years, I can't tell you how many gallons of tapioca people have donated. And I'm proud to say I've eaten every bowl of it, which explains this. So here I am, and I know I'm running long. Anyway, from there, it just became wonderful. And they invited me to walk with them. And they when their arm went back like this beautiful path, and I'm walking down this incredible pathway about 10 feet wide, a guardian on either side, and the tall guardian, the warrior guardian behind. And my vision had changed, Rick. I call it omnivision. Without turning my head, I could see everything from 360 degrees. I could smell, I could feel the flowers growing. And the flowers were colors we don't have on Earth. And it looked like they were diaphanous, like you could see through them, and so that color merged with another one, with another one, with another one, to create a color that is not on our color charts. It's incredible.
Wow.
And the flowers, I remarked on how beautiful they smelled, and they invited me to kneel down and smell them, and I did. And as I was down there, and I said, they smell so beautiful. And my guardian said to me, yes, James, that is the scent of sanctity. The scent of sanctity. And as I'm down there, I heard, I thought it was a tingling of bells, but I realized it had a melody. And I said, is that music I hear? And they said, yes, James. The flowers are so happy you're here. They're singing to you. And so, in the interest of time, I'll move forward. They showed me many things, and as I walked, and I hate using this term, not only I've always been inquisitive. Every question I asked, they answered it before I had the question finished. And it made all this stuff that made sense, how heaven worked, how things are. And we were just having this wonderful conversation. And then they stopped and stepped back and smiled at me, and then they bowed to me really low. And I mean, this wasn't just a bow of courtesy. This was a bow of reverence. And I felt uncomfortable. And I said, why do you bow to me? I'm just a man. I should be bowing to you. And the guardian said, James, do you not know that when we look at mankind, we see the light of our master within you? In a world where people feel useless, worthless, in each of us is the light of God. And that's what I try to do, is make people understand. But you have to nourish that light to make it shine, to make it matter. You have to do acts of kindness and deeds of love, to do the things that you're doing with your program and the mission that you have. And the light of God is within us, Rick. and if you let it shine, people see the difference in you. They do, and they're intrigued by it. I mean, there are some cynics that wouldn't matter if it was Jesus that appeared to them; they wouldn't believe it. But for the majority of us, I think that the majority of us yearn for the goodness of God, and
Oh, yeah, I
yeah, I
agree
agree
100%.
100%. So anyway, we continue to walk. They show me all sorts of things, and finally we came to a. And I have to talk about this because horses are a huge part of this. As I said, I never studied the Bible. I didn't realize that when Jesus comes back, he'll be riding a white horse. So we come to the split rail fence, just as you'd see in Texas or California or here. We have horses, and and the guardian said, "James, look." And I think once again they were showing me something that I loved to make me feel I was home. And he made a motion, and around a clump of trees came three of the most magnificent horses I had ever seen. And they cantered over toward me. And as they trotted across the grass, the light from the grass skittered up from their feet. So it was the most beautiful effect of watching horses run across a field of light. And they came up to the fence, and I couldn't resist. The first one that came up to the fence was a white one. The next one was a palomino, and the next one was a dun. And I put my hand through the fence and stroked it to stroke its chest, and my hand went right into its body. It's a being of light. But here's the wonderful thing: when I withdrew my hand, the light of the horse's body clung to my hand till I got it back about 10 inches, and then let go and went back into the body of the horse. And the same thing
Wow.
happened when I touched the angel. And I like to refer to it now as the sticky love of God. God's love
Yeah,
wants to cling
we're all
to us.
connected.
Yeah. So anyway, it was wonderful. And as I'm standing there looking at the horses, uh, I look up in the sky, and I see what I think, as in my pilot's mind, are contrails. You see them on a sunny day, and aircraft over 30,000 feet, crystallization of the water, the fuel, forms ice crystals, they disappear as they come down into the warmer atmosphere. And I'm looking and I'm thinking, are those contrails? Again, God put something in front of me that I could recognize. And I turned to the guardian and I said, "Are those contrails?" And he smiled and said, "No, James, those are the prayers of your family for your soul." Prayer matters. Prayer matters. And they told me other things about prayer, but I realized we had to get moving. So anyway, uh, then the guardian said to me, I found out later that in fact my family had gathered in our kitchen after the RCMP the Royal Canadian Mounted Police had found my body by triangulating my cell phone and called the ambulance and declared a DOA. So they came to the home, and Lorraine was there with her sisters, and because I had been missing overnight. So anyway, then the guardian said to me, "Hold my cloak." So I reached over and held on the cloak, and suddenly I'm in the air, and I'm in my element. I'm looking down, and he makes a motion, and I thought it was a reflecting pool we were looking at, but suddenly the surface of this water moved back, and I realize I'm looking down on none other but the holy city, heaven, God's home. And Rick, I'll try to be as concise as possible, but it's beautiful. Imagine buildings not made from stone, but hewn from blocks of light. Halls of music, halls of knowledge. Just beautiful. And I'm looking at millions of people, but no one crowded on these gorgeous walkways, like bordered by green grass, and it's just stunning to look at. And but there was one building very quickly I had to tell you about that stood out from all the rest. There was a different light to it. And I said, and in front of it was a huge expanse of green, of lawn and trees. And there were thousands, if not more, children of all ages playing and running around and so on. And I said, and they had cats and dogs and deer, birds. And I turned to the guardian and I said, "What is that building?" And the answer stunned me, stunned me. The guardian said, "That, James, is the nursery." And I said, "Nursery? A nursery in heaven?" "Yes, James. This is where the souls of aborted children, or children who have died of illness or stillborn, they have died in their innocence. Their light is so precious to God. They are gathered back here, and we raise them in the nursery." And I was intrigued by this, absolutely intrigued. And I said, "Well, are they like kids on Earth?" The guardian gave me this kind of little smile and he said, "Oh yeah, oh yes."
Beautiful.
Beautiful. It is. So anyway, there's some other stuff, but I'll move ahead. So I'm standing there, or I'm above, and then they showed me other things like the halls of healing, and I questioned that, and I said, "Well, why would there be healing in heaven? I thought heaven was everything was perfection," and they said, "Yes, James, it is." But they said many times souls come to us through trauma, accidents, drug overdose, as you did yourself. And they said, what we do is that that soul is invited to be in this, and in that hall of healing, they are gently explained to them why their lives took the turn that they did. And it's not to tell them they did it wrong. It is to help them acclimatize to the glories of heaven and the love of the Father.
Wow, that's a part I had not heard in your story before.
It's stunning. And so that makes so much sense. I mean, when you're ripped from your body in a car accident and you're suddenly, where do you go?
Mm-hmm.
All of healing, and they take care of you. Anyway, so we came back down, and I realized I hadn't seen the tall angel in a while. And so this is the main event. So I turned looking for the tall angel, and there was a slight rise about 50 feet away from me, just a slight rise in the ground. And I looked, and there was the tall angel, but he was bent very low, and he had a book in his hands, a very slim book. And I realized for the first time there was another being facing the angel, but I couldn't see the face. You know how you drive down a hot road in Texas or anywhere these days that it's hot, and there's a shimmer on the pavement. Well, the being reading the book that the angel held up was sideways, and there was this shimmer covering the face. But I was intrigued because this wasn't an angel. This was something more. Because at the same time, although I could not see the face, there was like a fountain of golden light that merged out of this figure and descended. And the best way I could describe it is it was like slow-moving golden water, very gentle, and moved down. And I realized that when the water, or when the golden light hit the ground that this figure was standing on, although the flowers surrounding them were already beautiful and perfect and in bloom, when this golden light flowed over these flowers, they bloomed even more beautifully than before. It was such a stunning thing to watch, flowers blooming twice. And that I watched in amazement as that water came down, that golden light flowed down that bank and to where I was and pooled around my feet. And instantly, this feeling coursed through me that the figure that I didn't recognize, the knowledge was given to me that I was looking at none other than Jesus Christ, the Son of God. The Son of God. Someone that I had thought was just some dusty legend. And I'm looking at this incredible visage. And at the same time, the that I'm transfixed, the shimmer vanished, And this beautiful, noble, handsome, dark-skinned man turned and looked at me and smiled at me. And I'm transfixed. And as I'm gazing into those eyes of gray and green and blue, the tall angel who had had the book open for Jesus to read straightened up, turned and looked at me and said, "James, what did you do with the life my master gave you?" And I began to cry. I had no answer. I had lived a life of what I thought was the epitome of the American Canadian dream of success. And now I'm realizing that this little slim book, no bigger than a roadside diner menu, that Jesus was reading, was the book of my life that I thought was so incredibly fantastic. And all I had to show for it was this little slim book, no thicker than a cheap roadside diner menu. And I'm overwhelmed with sadness for the opportunities I had missed, overwhelmed with grief for the people that I didn't help that I could have. As Charles Dickens said in his wonderful book, mankind should have been my business. And I was so involved in myself. And now I am determined, Rick, that if I have the opportunity, and I take nothing for granted, if I live a good life, if I fulfill this mission Christ put me on to his satisfaction, and I have the opportunity to go back, this time when they read the book of my life, Rick, I hope they need 3 angels and a forklift to open it.
They will, Jim, they will.
Sorry. The thousands of times I've told this story, it gets to me. And anyway, I had no answer. And then the guardian closed the book and disappeared. And then Jesus turned directly toward me, and he had the most wonderful smile on his face. And I gazed into those eyes of gray and green and blue, and I was lost in eternity. I was lost in the cascade of love that came toward me. Because in those eyes, Rick, I saw sadness for the way I'd lived my life. I saw sadness for the way mankind has not embraced his Father's message. But still, deep in those eyes, I saw forgiveness for me and love for me. And that feeling is priceless, to know that I am loved that deeply. And the strangest thing, and you will experience this, all of your viewers will, when you look into his eyes, you get this, your intellect tells you differently, but I had this feeling that I was the only one he had ever created. It was that personal a moment, and you'll feel that. And I just had to get closer to him. So I had knelt down in the pool of golden light, and then I tried to crawl toward him. And when I did, he continued to smile, but then he raised his right hand in a gesture that was no way you could mistake it. It was stop, come no closer. He didn't say that, but I immediately knew what it meant. And so this is the whole episode right here. I waited with bated breath, held his hand up because I realized he was about to speak to me. And he did. And with his hand still raised to come no closer, he said, to me in the gentlest of voices. And unlike the angels, who it was a mind thing, Jesus was, though you or I were speaking, his lips moved. It was like a conversation with a friend. And this is what he said to me with his hand raised. He said, James, my son, this is not yet your time. Go back and tell your brothers and sisters of the wonders we have shown you. And then his right hand slowly descended and closed over his left. And then the full enormity of it struck me. I was not being allowed to stay in this beautiful land. I felt that all my life I had wandered the earth looking for home, and I had finally found it. And I began to cry, I began to plead, I began to beg, please, Jesus, don't send me back. Please, Jesus, this is what I've searched for all my life. Please let me stay with you. Please let me stay. And I remember I actually said this. I said, please, Jesus, let me stay. I won't be any trouble. I actually said that to the Son of God. I won't be any trouble. And I think he smiled when I said that. And then suddenly two guardians are beside me. They're bigger than the warrior angel, and they lift me up and they turn me around, and I realize I'm being given the bum's rush. So I struggled against them, which was useless, but I did manage to turn my head back and to plead with Jesus one more time to let me stay. But when I looked back, Jesus was gone. But Rick, standing exactly in the place where Jesus has stood, was the warrior angel who had greeted me originally. And this time he began to grow like the sun. And so he's 15 feet tall, 12-foot wingspan on either side. They're enormous. And he's appearing like this, and then the wings come out to their full expansion, like you see an eagle at the top of its flight. And I realize what he's doing is blocking the way forward for me. And suddenly I'm in a tunnel again. It's not beautiful. It's not lit. It's dark. It's cold. I hear water running. And honestly, and I shouldn't say this in public, but this is the best description, Rick. I felt like I was flushed. I mean, I shouldn't say that, but that was the down, And so, of course, in the meantime, I found all this out later. Lorraine was in the quiet room with her sisters, actually planning funeral arrangements, because they had told her there was no hope. I had no brain sign. Now, it's not, they keep you alive on pumps, but what they look for is brain sign. And they can tell if you're dreaming. They can tell if you're hallucinating from drugs. They see the activity in different parts of the hippocampus and so on. And they had said, Lorraine, it's been 11 hours. There's no hope of Jim recovering. And if he had recovered 8 or 9 hours ago, he might have just been a vegetable. And would you really want that? I tell people that's my greatest fear, Rick, coming back as a cabbage. I hate cabbage. But
not even a carrot, but a cabbage.
Yeah. So anyway, the nurse, so I guess the rest of the story is that they were busy in the ICU, but they still had me hooked up and triaged. And they had agreed to keep me that way until our kids arrived to kiss me goodbye. And then Lorraine was going to give the okay to disconnect. Although there was no brain sign. And so that's why they kept me. But they tell me that there was a young nurse that got quite scared when she heard noises coming from me. So, because I was already, supposedly gone. And I guess I come rearing up off the bed, screaming at the top of my lungs, because I was intubated. I had, hoses in every orifice, and 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 I'm yelling at the top of my lungs because I'm trying to. And they ran and got Lorraine and said, "Mrs. Woodford, come quick, come quick! Your husband's breathing so on his own." So Lorraine runs in, and as I said, she's a nurse. She climbs up on the bed with me, and I'm trying to focus. I mean, I've gone from the beauty of heaven to a hospital room, you know. Lorraine said my eyes were as big as saucers. I was trying to, and finally they watched I had complete renal failure. All my organs started to work again. I had, you know, with a person got that far gone, you turn purple and white, and because the blood is settling, and she climbed up on the bed and she's kissing me, and finally my blood pressure got to the point where they could take the tube out of me, and I look into her beautiful face, and she's crying, and of all the things, Rick, I could have said to my beautiful wife about my adventure in heaven was, Lorraine, I saw Jesus, and Jesus has horses.
Well, I think that's appropriate, Jim, because you're going back to the day that you met Lorraine, right, where you were both on horseback.
Someone said to me, called me from Pureflex and said that, or used to work for Pureflex, and said, "You've got the perfect movie." So, anyway, so I'm sorry I ran long. This isn't something that you could just can into 20 minutes. So.
No, it's been an honor and a pleasure, Jim, and I do want to. Well, first I want to thank you for sharing your story and in all the vivid detail because I've read your book. You know, again, it's Heaven an Unexpected Journey. I've read your book, and your book goes into even more detail than you did today, and so I recommend anyone that was touched by the story to get your book and to read it and learn more about some of the incredible things that you
And
saw
Rick
and
said
experienced.
it's available on Amazon. That's the best place to
Yes,
get it.
yes, of course, and we'll put in the show notes for the links and everything. We'll make sure that's in there.
Okay.
But one thing that you shared with me the other day, Jim, that I'd like you to share with our audience that's really important because I know, at least I get the sense that this was very important for you. You've told me, and I've heard you tell others that, you know, part of sharing your story and your experience in heaven and everything, that you're not someone that's trying to make a buck or profit off of your experience. And so you mentioned the other day that all the proceeds from the book and your speaking and everything, that where those go. And so I'd like you to just explain that to our listeners.
Well, I understand the cynicism that some people have, you know, and the so-called religious guys you see on Saturday night late, send me $29.95 and I'll save your immortal soul and include shipping and handling to hell. That's and I greatly resisted putting a book out, but finally a publisher said to me, "Listen, if you live to be 150, which you won't, you couldn't reach the number of people we can reach in a year. And if you're concerned about that, give the proceeds to charity and set up a 503(c) corporation." And that's what we did. So we help, and there's so much need for help now, especially post COVID. You know, but we try to support all the people that we feel are especially children's organizations. So when before COVID uh, hit, and I was doing a lot of traveling, you know, the honorariums and so on, we used as much of that once we paid our travel expenses to help people, to help children in various areas. And so, yeah, that's what we. It's small, uh, really, compared to, you know, the Red Cross or something, but we try to do what we can to help people. So, um, and it's just the right thing to do, Rick. It's just the right thing to do.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that because I know it was important, when we spoke the other day, for me to understand that. And that's part of what makes you a social impact hero is not that you're just that you're sharing this and you're doing what I view as God's work, but also that you're giving back and you're making this world a better place. So Jim, as we kind of wrap up here, there's one question that we ask. Well, there's actually two questions that we ask everyone on this podcast that I want to ask you. So one is we've coined a term that we call spark moments in life. And these are where your actions have a ripple effect that can impact others far beyond that original act. Right. So I know you discussed, hey, you could smile at someone and that could change their day. But can you think of someone that you've shared your testimony with, or someone that you know that you've shared something with, and they have come back and told you the impact that it's had on their life, or even someone that you've done, or even in the work that you're doing with the charity?
Thousands of impacts. And ripple is a good word. It's like throwing a rock into a small pond. You don't
Yeah.
know the ultimate ripple effect is going to be on the perimeter of that pond. It will have some. And so when we put kindness out into humanity, there's a ripple effect. And I know that's what you try to achieve with your wonderful program. And so there's many things. I remember just recently a lady called me and she said, Jim, she said, I saw you on CBN, 700 Club show, and on Sid Roth, and she said, my sister, and when I saw what you said about the nursery in heaven, my sister, when she was younger, went through a very, very rough period in her life with drugs and so on. She had 3 pregnancies, all that resulted in, because of her lifestyle, in the death, the children being stillborn. And, Rick, of all the things I talk about, the nursery in heaven is the one I get the most response to. Because for many women who maybe at that time in their life had no other option but to have and abortion's a terrible thing. You're turning out a light that God created. But still, there are circumstances, and I try to look at everyone with empathetic eyes, and they go through it. And anyway, she said to me, I showed my sister, who's now in her 40s, your program, and she said for the first time since I remember her as a teenager, there was a light in her, and she said she has completely stopped using drugs, and I know this for a fact because I had told her if she could be sober for 3 months, she could live with me. She's now been with me 2 years. She works in a food kitchen. She volunteers at a children's hospital. And so these are the kind. That's my reward. That's my reward, is seeing, as you eloquently put it, that ripple effect go out, and donating to a child in South America who now is getting ready to go to university in Miami to become a nurse because we made some things possible. It's wonderful. And I think,
Yeah, thank you, Jim, because I know we could probably devote 100 episodes to you sharing those ripple effects of your work. And
don't get me
I,
started.
yeah, I think that's a beautiful example. And I know my wife and I, we have 3 beautiful girls, and many years ago she had a miscarriage, and I've often wondered if we would ever be able to meet, who this baby might have become. And so that's a beautiful thought.
Well, the wonderful thing is you will see her again.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
You will.
Yeah. And that's incredible to hear. And I don't think my wife has gotten to that part in your book yet. She started your book, but she hasn't gotten to that part. So when she gets to that part, or when she hears this podcast, this episode, we will talk about that.
Oh,
Um,
can I throw in, and I know we're out of time, can I throw in something that I should not have left out?
absolutely.
When I was looking down on, at the populace of heaven, I mentioned it, there was something that I was, and I think people get a kick out of this. It's good news, at least for someone my age. Uh, when I was looking down, there was something that I was seeing but not understanding. And finally it came to me. So I turned to the guardian and I said, am I seeing this correctly? Because it seems to me that just about everyone I'm looking at here in heaven, with the exception of the children, of course, and a few other exceptions, uh, they all seem to be in perfect health and in their early 30s. And I remember well the wonderful smile of the guardian because he was about to tell me something that was a true revelation. And the guardian said, yes, James, what you are seeing is correct. No one in heaven, with a few exceptions, is any older than Jesus was when he died at 33. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to being 33 again.
Yeah, me
So,
too.
whether your child died 50 years ago, they age in heaven about 3 times as fast as we do on earth because they're not growing a mortal body, they're growing a body of light, but they will never be any older than 33. But you will know them because their soul will know yours and your soul will know them.
Yeah. Beautiful to think of. Thank you for sharing that part because I know everybody will love hearing that as well, Jim. Well, so our audience would love to connect with you. I know you have jimwoodfordministries.com for your website, but any other place that would be good for them to see your work, connect with your work, obviously your books, but
Uh, well, the Sid Roth show is a good show to watch. There's a lot of detail in that. As I said, Christian Broadcasting Network 700 Club. And I just recently did Daystar TV in Texas, Joni Lamb and her family, and it was a wonderful event.
yeah, saw that. It's a good one.
And, you know, I kind of surprise people because when they phone my ministry, I answer. I don't, and I'm always behind, but I will get to you if you leave me a message. And because I'm so grateful that people take the time to reach out to me, and I hear such wonderful, heartwarming stories of how um, our, our this event in our lives, Lorraine's life and mine, has helped people, and that's our reward.
Yeah, and my goal is that thousands, millions people will more people will hear about your story because of the result of this podcast and our platform. Because our goal at iSpark Change is to positively impact 1 billion people in the next 5 years through our community and our work. And we can't do it alone, and that's why we need the help of leaders like you, people with the light of God, to share their stories, because that's helped spread our work. And so the last question I'll ask, Jim, is because we value your thoughts and opinions as a social impact hero. So having, being one of the few people that has, been to the other side, so to speak, the question I have is that we ask everyone to kind of peer into the future, their mind's eye, and say, what can the world become if everyone starts impacting one another in a positive way, if everyone feels that they can impact the future of humanity and believes that there is hope? What can the world become?
And that's the greatest question of all: is what are we going to be? I'm not being overly optimistic when I say this. It's because one thing that this journey has taught me is the amount of goodness there is in the world, Rick. But we are creatures of our communication system. And you will never see any of the major news networks devote 3 or 4 or 5 minutes to the fact that I took soup to a neighbor because she wasn't feeling well,
Yeah.
or you shoveled her walk, or you did this or you did that. And to emphasize this, I actually had this conversation with the Guardian. I said, why hasn't God come back and destroyed the world? It's a mess. It's a cesspool. What? Why does God put up with us? What does God see in us? And the Guardian gazed at me with those intense, beautiful violet eyes and said something profound. The guardian said, "James, do you not know that what God sees in mankind is himself? Himself." And the guardian went on to say, it's easy to look at how mankind has had wars, and you will always have evil. Satan never rests. And then he did something unique. He said, if you took all the evil that has ever been in the world, it is as this. It is as this. If you take all the goodness that has been in the world since our Master created it, it is as this. But we don't see it, Rick. We watch the news and all we see is war, pestilence, disease raging through the world. But for those of us that are on the front lines of, like you and I, and trying to spread the word, I have imminent faith in the goodness of mankind. I saw it, and it will only get greater. It's going to take a long time, but it will. And speaking of time, people say to me, well, do you have any knowledge of end times?
I agree. I agree for sure. Well, Jim, it's been an honor and a pleasure. I definitely feel blessed to have had you on the show. Thank you for taking the time today to share your heart, your wisdom with the audience. You're passionate, inspirational, and you're genuine and caring, as I said. You're humble, you're generous, and I can tell that you lead with a heart of service and gratitude, which tells me that you will continue to impact lives, you will continue to cause ripple effects, and you will continue to spread the light of God throughout the world. So keep wielding your superpowers as an Iceberg Change social impact hero, and God bless you.
Well, Rick, may I leave you with this? May the first voice you hear in heaven be mine.
Love it. Thank you very much, Jim.
God bless. Goodbye, everyone.
Remember, Impact Heroes, every positive action can be a spark moment that has a ripple effect that spreads far beyond the initial act. So go out there and spark change. Don't forget, if you enjoyed this episode, then please smash that 5-star rating on iTunes or Spotify and leave a review. We value your comments and we want to hear from you in the community. Thank you for listening. God bless you, and we'll see you next week on the iSpark Change podcast.